in just a moment, but I want to show you something in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 8 where we're going to start. And the title of the lesson tonight in Mark chapter 12 is Perspectives on Wealth and Power. Perspectives on Wealth and Power. These are fundamental doctrines that Jesus taught that most people, when they think of a fundamental doctrine, they think of grace, which is a fundamental doctrine. But they don't understand there's a range of fundamental truths we need to learn about. And one of them is about what real wealth is and what real power is. So, children rarely understand the value of money. I remember getting my first paper money as a child. My grandfather bought me a wallet. And so I was really impressed with this thing, although it was empty. And then my grandfather had a little envelope under the tree, and I opened it up, and it had a $1 bill in it. And I thought I was the richest man in the world. I had no idea the value of a dollar bill. But it was my first dollar. I don't know how old I was. Might have been 5 years old, whatever. But I remember keeping that dollar in my wallet. I wish I still had it. But I kept that dollar in my wallet. Not knowing the value of it, I just attributed to it great wealth. I thought I was very wealthy. And Jesus says the value of what we have, is determined by how much we give away. So everything that we have, we first got from God, didn't we? I mean, every breath you have that you take, God first gave it to you. Your children, your home, everything you think, well, I worked for it. Yeah, but who gave you the health to work for it? Who opened the door for the job for you to get? So on and so forth. Don't be so arrogant that you get this idea that you've earned all of these things. Some of the things you really have worked for, but in the end, God has given us everything that we have. So what we have, we should freely be able to give away. Look at Matthew chapter 10 and verse 8. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 8, heal the sick. Jesus says to the disciples, cleanse the lepers. Think about the power of being able to go to somebody that was completely ridden with leprosy, of a bacterial infection that was causing skin and appendages, fingers, and his nose or her nose or earlobes to fall off, and be able to go up to that person and touch them, pray for them, and heal them on the spot. Think of the power of that. Jesus said, heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely ye have received this power, so freely give it. Now, I would appreciate if somebody had the power to heal, I would appreciate them going and healing without charge. I would appreciate that. Well, shouldn't we also appreciate if somebody's been given wealth or money or any kind of power, political power, whatever, shouldn't they freely give it away? That's the principle we're going to learn. So, let's start in Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12. In verse 38. Mark 12 and verse 38. And I'm just going to read down to verse 44, and then we'll come back and go through it bit by bit. And he said unto them, in his doctrine, remember that word doctrine, it simply means in his foundational, fundamental truths that he was teaching. He wasn't teaching opinion, he wasn't teaching philosophy, theology, as far as theory. He was teaching absolute doctrine, absolute truth. He said, beware of the scribes, which love to go in long clothing and love salutation in marketplaces, and the chief seats in the synagogues, they love that, and the uppermost rooms in feasts, which devour widows' houses. And for a pretense make long prayers, these shall receive greater damnation. Verse 41, and Jesus sat over against the treasury. Same context here, just a little bit later. I want to show you how it matches in a moment. Behold, and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury. And many that were rich cast in much. And there came a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and said unto them, verily I say unto you, that this poor widow hath cast in more than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance. But she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. So back there in verse 38, Jesus says, beware of following how the scribes lived. Beware of allowing them to influence how you live. Who are the scribes? We talk about the scribes quite a lot because they had a very high stature in Jewish society. A scribe was a very well-paid position, a well-paid job. They would have been known as a professor. They taught. They and the Pharisees sort of were bosom buddies. And here are these scribes who loved to look the part, didn't they? What did they love to wear? Long flowing garments. And they wanted to look the part of somebody that looked important. They wanted to stand out. They wanted to look and seem superior to everyone else. And they believed that they were superior. They thought they were more educated. They thought that they were more precise. They thought they were above the rest of society. They loved to be publicly saluted in the market. So say I'm a scribe, and so I go into a market, and I got this long flowing robe, and I would walk through, and I would let that thing just ruffle in the wind as I'd go, and somebody would say, "Oh, Father so-and-so," which is what they were called. That's why Jesus said, "Let no man call you Father," because that's an arrogant term. It was a puffed up term, and they loved to be noticed. They loved to be saluted in the markets, and they loved being given the best seats at a dinner. So let Father so-and-so sit up here at the top. Do you know that hasn't gone away, has it? You have the Catholic Church doing it, but they're not the only ones. You know who else likes to do it? Movie stars, music stars. If ever a music star was trying to get into a club or a cinema, they would go right up to the front and says, "Do you know who I am?" "Oh, yes, you go right on in." They love having that power, don't they? As you would expect, they have that power. They love using it. But Jesus says, beware of these scribes, how they live because of the effect that they have. Verse 40. They devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. These shall receive greater damnation. Let's just take that first part for a minute. To devour a widow house. Now, who usually is the most abused by religion? And this is what psychologists and atheists really capitalize on. What class of people is usually the most abused by religionists? The poor. The poor. And here Jesus picks the poorest of the poor, a widow who has no husband and probably has no children to care for. All she has is a house that her husband has worked hard to pay for and pay off so that she has something to be able to live in for the rest of her days. And these arrogant scribes, these scribes who love the preeminence, they had no problem devouring a poor widow's livelihood. They had no concern for anyone but themselves and for their own personal well-being and their profit. They constantly, Jesus reminds, and really the people kind of knew it, but they kept saying, that man is a godly man, therefore what he's doing, it must be okay. And yet they were robbing the poorest people of all of their security. So the scribes were great performers. It says there in verse 40, it says, they devour widows' houses and for a pretense make what kind of prayers? Okay, now I don't know if I did some research. And at that time, at the heyday of the Pharisees and the scribes, these men had 3 times during the day where they would pray for 3 hours. And then they would take a break, they would have lunch. But they prayed 9 hours a day for periods of time. And people could not interrupt them. And that's why Jesus said the Pharisees would come and stand in the marketplace and they would begin to pray. And when they did do that, they would pray for hours in the middle of that place, and so the whole place would have to shut down. They'd all have to put it back because a holy man was doing something holy. And Jesus said, beware of that. Because when we pray, we should go into our what? Into our closets. These guys, were they really praying truly? No. This was a performance. This was better than Shakespeare. They would begin to pray, and the people would, and they would go onto their face. They would get on their knees, and they would say, a holy man is praying. And what were they doing? They were trying to get people to look up to them so much that they were willing to give them every penny, thinking, this person is worthy of all of my money, including the widows. But they were frauds, they were fakers, they were thieves who robbed the weak and the poor. They would even, and I have had experience here in Ireland where I personally know of a priest who sat at bedsides, and he even told me about it, sat at bedsides and would talk to poor widows who were dying, and they bequeathed their house to him in Ireland. And he's not the only one. That evidently has happened throughout history when a very devout Catholic woman who's getting ready to sign her will, the priest sits next to her and encourages her to put him into her will. Now that is, you say, that's terrible. It's how things are. And Jesus warns about these people taking advantage of the poor. Pretending to take care of and saying, I'll take care of your property, I'll take care of disposing your assets, whatever. Listen to Isaiah 56. Go back to Isaiah 56. Isaiah chapter 56 and verse 10. Isaiah has some words for him. Isaiah 56 and verse 10, his watchmen are blind. A watchman? Jesus is talking, God here is talking about people who are supposed to be watching out for people's souls. His watchmen are blind. They're all ignorant. They're all dumb dogs. They cannot bark, sleeping, lying down, loving to slumber. Yea, they are not just dogs, they're greedy dogs, which can never have enough. They're all shepherds that cannot understand. They can't understand what people are going through. They all look to their own way, everyone for his gain from his quarter, from his area where he's working. Greedy dogs. Who do you think sends the most money to the televangelists on the God channel? Widows. People who need hope. People who are poor. Who do you think the Catholic Church, or why do you think the Catholic Church invented prayers for the dead? That's not in the Bible. Why would the Catholic Church sell prayer cards? Because it keeps people in business. It funds religion. You're praying for somebody who's already dead. Think about it. We despise people who sell snake oil. This will cure baldness. And athlete's foot. and go on and on and on. And people, and we would shut them down and say, you're lying. Yet when it comes to religions, people are duped the most. And no wonder no wonder this room is not full, because people don't really value the truth. They think that, even Christians think, religion's a little bit too much. You know, there's some shenanigans going on. And what a shame when a church is really trying to do right and doesn't make money off of people. We just serve and give. We have the fewest attendance. That's what happens, because the full churches are the ones that are good at duping, and it just grieves me. So there's too much robbery going on, and it's a shame that people are duped, but they are. And I wanted to say this: a gospel preacher, if I were a missionary in, let's say, Ethiopia, how should I live? Should I live in a house that I'm used to in America? What kind of house should I live in if I'm serving people in Ethiopia? I should live like the people that I'm ministering to, or below. Because I think Jesus stepped down and actually lived lower than the people he even ministered to, didn't he? And yet, how many preachers do you find doing that? How many missionaries do you find? Not that I'm finding fault with a missionary who owns a house. I own a house. It's not wrong to own property. It's not wrong to have a bit of money. But what is the lifestyle of the person who is trying to win their community? So kind of convicting there. Then Jesus says that these fraudsters are going to receive the greater what? Damnation. What would that mean? Go to Matthew chapter 23 and verse 33. Matthew 23, 33. Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how shall ye escape the damnation of hell? Now, it's already bad enough to be going to hell. But Jesus says there are some people who are going to receive the greater damnation. So there is a worse judgment of hell for some people than other sinners that they might experience in hell. So think about that. Evidently, there are degrees of punishment in hell. And that hypocrites and all such who oppose the poor, oppress the poor, who, with the guise of godliness, they use their wealth as a proof that they're godly, they will be partakers of the greatest degrees of hell. I think 35 degrees Celsius is pretty hot. Would you agree? 35 degrees is pretty warm. But degree, how about 135 degrees? So there are different degrees of hell. I think hell is bad enough. I don't want to go there at all. But there are degrees of hell, a greater damnation. So who says Jesus didn't talk much about hell? He's pretty explicit. Now let's get on to the real point of the message here. Real wealth and real giving. What did those scribes think that they had? Power. Attention. Whose attention were they seeking? The people's. They saw crowds and they wanted the crowds to think highly of them, and for them to be nearly worshipped. They wanted to pray as if they were so religious, and they wanted the people to give them such honor, but really give them their wealth. Jesus, let me show you real power. Let me show you real wealth. Verse 41, Jesus sat over against the treasury, and he beheld, which means he sat and he watched. He was waiting for somebody to come. This is really cute. And he beheld how the people cast money into the treasury. When it says cast, it was like, it was not like you're dropping money into our green box. You know, you might drop a 10-euro note in, or a 50-euro note in, or a euro coin. They're casting it in. What are they doing? They're bringing bags, and they're putting it over the side and letting it trickle down and make a huge ding and crashing sound through all the other coins and the other objects that have been thrown in there. There were, let me read it again. Jesus sat over against the treasury and beheld how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. And I want you to see, wealthy people were giving a lot of money into the temple treasury. There was a huge box there. We'd call it a chest. And that chest every day was emptied. And people would put money in, and then in the evening they'd count it and they'd take it out, so on and so forth. This was a very public act. This was something that people would come and watch. The people, these wealthy people, were giving for one reason: to be noticed. That's the only reason why they were giving. People's heads would turn when they heard a bag of gold or silver coins crashing into that giving box. And really, the people thought, look at how much those people are giving in number. Example, if I gave to the church 25,000 euros and Bill gave 25 euros, who gave more? Our flesh would say, certainly Pastor Craig did. he gave a bigger number. But listen to Jesus as he always flips things opposite. Verse 42. And there came a certain poor, who was it? Somebody who is easily taken advantage of. Somebody who should be worried about every penny. And when she comes, she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. Now, I had to look that up. A mite, it took 2 mites to make a farthing. A farthing means 1/4 of a penny. I know a halfpenny is a half of a penny. That's why it's called a halfpenny. So a farthing is 1/4 of a penny. So here's this woman. She has 2 mites, which is worth a halfpenny, a half of a penny. It was enough to pay for a half of a loaf of bread, and that's all. And I guarantee you nobody noticed her. Would you accept Jesus? Jesus actually has to tell his disciples, come over here, guys, look at that woman. And they're going, she's got nothing. When she threw in her 2 mites, do you think they made a sound? Now, I actually have a mite at home. I forgot to bring it. It is like, if you flipped it in the air, I don't think it would come back. It is so light, it's like aluminum. You flip it up, it would just go and go and go and maybe come back, like a snowflake or something. I don't know. It is so lightweight, there was no sound, but Jesus almost stood up and clapped. These 2 smallest coins, if you took the pinky fingernail, your pinky fingernail, that's the size of a mite. Okay? And then he teaches a lesson in verse 43. And he called unto him his disciples and said unto them, verily, I say unto you, that this single poor widow hath cast more in than all they which have cast in unto the treasure. So here's the thing. The amount that was already in that box that had been given all day by dozens and dozens and dozens of wealthy people. She throws in her 2, and he says, that's the most that was given today. Verse 44, for all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want. All right, so, wait a minute. Do you think that she needed those 2 mites? It's on. It's okay. He's working on it. Do you think that she needed those 2 mites? Yes, and she would be wanting bread after she gave. Out of her want she gave, out of their abundance the wealthy gave. But she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. This poor widow, with no one to care for her, has cast in far more than the wealthiest of all the rich men who ever gave that day, and more than all the people who were wealthy who gave that day. Because the rich only gave a small portion of what they had, and they never felt loss. Do you know why rich people love raising taxes? Even if they have to pay a little bit more tax, do you know why? It doesn't bother them. No, go ahead and raise the tax. Because it doesn't affect them. A person who makes 26,000 euros a year, when the tax band goes up 3%, that affects them incredibly much. But somebody who makes 3 million a year, 3% doesn't affect them. So you'll find most wealthy people very liberal in their mindset about politics. They want to keep their money, I understand that. But they never feel the pinch like you and I would when they raise taxes. That's why I have a lot of opinions about taxes. I'll talk about that another day. Better not go down there. But that poor widow gave all her living, all that she owned. And Jesus, I think he almost stood up and clapped. And he said, I noticed her. Did you notice her? God noticed her. All of heaven noticed this woman. She has heaven's attention with her small gift. And that blew their minds because they thought that rich people were blessed. Remember, Jesus gave the parable. It wasn't a parable. Sorry, don't ever let me say it's a parable. The example of the rich man and Lazarus. And when they heard about Lazarus dying, nobody cared. But when the rich man died, oh, there was massive funeral, and people thought surely he was a good man because he had so much money. He was blessed by God. And Jesus said, and in hell the rich man lifted up his eyes. Remember that? And that shook people to the core, because certainly if a person has wealth, God gave it to them, and that made them, that proved that they were a good person. And I've told you, I said, if you ever came into 100,000 euros, you would think, God must think I'm a good person. Look at how much he's given me. The people never thought how easy it was for rich people to give their money away. But you know, there was a person standing right there in the midst of those disciples who was poorer than that widow woman. Who am I talking about? He didn't even have 2 mites. Jesus only owned the clothes on his back. That widow woman, Jesus taught, she has power. So money does not buy you real power. Having money doesn't give you power. We think it would. Having popularity, you know what gives power? Or what gives you power? Giving what you have away. That is real power. So what's our lesson? All right, the value of the gift is found in what we have left over. The value of the gift is in what we have left over. If you gave your wife a 5,000 euro holiday, don't think about it, Nita, because it's not going to happen. But if you gave your wife a 5,000 euro holiday for your anniversary, and you spent all of your money to pay for it, that trip would be priceless, wouldn't it? It'd cost you all your money just to go on that trip. But if you gave your wife a 5,000 euro holiday and you could afford it every week of your life, that 5,000 euro holiday would be a ho-hum. You understand what I'm saying? Well, not to my wife. She goes, bring it on. But you understand what I'm saying? When you can afford it, it doesn't have as much value. When you can't afford it, what you give away has more value. Now, let me just say this. Giving is different than tithing. Jesus is not talking about tithing here. He's talking about giving. The tithe is something we owe to God, like our taxes. There's no debate. It's what we're supposed to pay. But the giving is something you give out of love. But when these people were giving to God, were they showing love to God? Or were they wanting love for themselves? They wanted people to go, oh, what a good person that person is. That's all those wealthy people were looking for, was attention. So God is not asking you to give everything you have and be poor. That's not what he's saying. But it is true, if you've not noticed it, that the poor usually give by percentage more than the wealthy. I told you the example. When I was a kid, I made my money as a 14-year-old going from door to door, convincing people to let me mow their grass. Do you know who paid me the most to mow their grass? The retired man who was too feeble to mow his own grass. And it would cost me like, I'd get like, normally for a front and a backyard, I would get like $10. But you know what those old men would give me? 20. But if I went to the big corner house that had like 3/4 of an acre of grass, I go, I'm going to make a fortune on this guy. That guy would come out and he would argue, you didn't finish over here and that's not well done. Listen, you're only going to get a tenner. That rich dude, man, I got more money from the poor guy who's on the skinniest amount of retirement because he had a heart to give. Poor people often give more than wealthy people in value. So the question is, why do we give God so little and usually only the leftovers? He does not need our money. Does God need our money? Bill, do we need to keep God kind of propped up, or the tax man's going to collect on him or something? No. Here's the truth. We need to give to be changed and to be made better people. Philippians 2:3 says this, let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem, value others better than themselves. Give honor to other people. Give honor. You say, well, they're not worth it. You weren't either. That's why it's right, and I think it's absolutely the worst culture we live in for young people and old alike to just treat each other like dirt. A young man should say to an older man, yes, sir, when he asks, would you do this for me? Yes, I will. Yes, sir. Now, I'm not trying to make it into a military. I'm not trying to get you to get this thing of a cruelty of like it was maybe in your past where that was rude. I'm talking about honor. It is, I told you about the woman that I was at a coffee shop and I was behind somebody and the woman said, do you want this too? And I said, yes, ma'am. She said, don't call me ma'am. I said, yes, sir. She laughed, I laughed, and I ran. She was not a happy person that day. I was just trying to give honor. Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am. So my point is, wouldn't it be nice if we just gave honor to people and we just honored them with nice words? How about giving praise? We give it to little kids. I think little kids don't deserve all the, you're the best. The kid's probably not the best, okay? But all day long, all they hear is, you're the best. Oh, you're the best. You're the smartest. I understand the motive behind it, but I think we forget that, you know, if you're married, it's nice to say to your husband, you're the best. You're my man. You're the most gorgeous. You're the strongest woman I ever met. Man, I'm glad I married you. Give praise. Give money away. Just for once, just give without your left hand knowing what your right hand is doing. Just buy something for other people. Buy something for church. Buy people. If you're standing in queue and somebody's behind you and they got a coffee or something, right? Just say, I'll pay for that too. We used to do that. Remember we had that thing, the act of kindness? And it gave us an opportunity to give a track away. This is the reason why I bought that coffee for you. Force yourself to give things away. Give away your time. You know how valuable time is? When you have none. All of a sudden, that time that you give away is worth a lot more. When you have no job, no family, and you've given your time, amen, but it doesn't mean as much as when those of us who are busy give our time away. All right. Get noticed in heaven. The last thought is get noticed in heaven. Jesus noticed that woman, and he notices us when we give. So Jesus says, you want power? You want wealth? You'll get the power of God on you, and you'll have great wealth when you give things away. Father, just help us to ponder this thing, because it is harder than we think to become a giver. We'd like to have money, and we say if we ever had money, we'd give some of it away, but that's not what you're waiting for. You're waiting for us to go ahead and do it now before we ever have the money, because that's where we're changed. We don't need money to be a giver. We don't need power given to us by men to be powerful. We need to have a soft heart that sees other people and never takes advantage of them, but blesses them to have real power with God. So thank you for this lesson, and help us to spend time with you humbly in prayer now. In Jesus' name, amen.